So today we're going to talk about angle relationships, and as you can see from our graphic organizer, there are 5 types that we're going to be looking at today, and then we're really going to focus on 3 out of the 5. So let's take a look at these. The first kind is adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are 2 angles that are next to each other, okay, and they have a common side. Okay, so adjacent just means next to in this particular case. And so a picture of that would look like this. Okay, and if we look, we could call this angle 1, and we could call the other angle angle 2. So they're next to each other and they share a side, which in this case would be this side right here. Okay, so those would be adjacent angles. They're next to each other and share a side. The next type of angles we're going to look at are vertical angles. Vertical angles are 2 angles that are across from each other. Okay, so they're across from each other on intersecting lines. The other important fact is they're always congruent. And remember, congruent means has the same measure. And so what you would be looking for here is you're going to have 2 lines. There's 1 line, there's 2 lines. They're going to intersect. Okay. And then your vertical angles are going to be across from each other. So if this is one of my angles, let's call it angle 1, and this is my other angle, it's across from, call it angle 2. Now, what's different with vertical angles that didn't happen with adjacent angles is that angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent. They have the same measure. So we could say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So if angle 1 was 100 degrees, you know angle 2 is also 100 degrees. Now, if you're looking close enough at this picture, you will also see that, hey, this angle right here is vertical to this angle. They're across from it. And we could call this angle 3 and this angle 4. Since they're across from each other, we know they're vertical. Okay. We also could say angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. So vertical angles, they're directly across from each other, and they're always congruent. The next pair we're going to look at are linear. Well, actually, let's drop down. Let's do complementary. We'll do linear last. Excuse me. All right, so complementary angles are any 2 angles whose sum is 90. So remember, sum means adds up to 90. And there are 2 ways that you can see this happening. The first way would look like this. We have 2 angles. Okay, they happen to be adjacent, but you'd see this box in the corner. That box means that those 2 angles add up to 90. Because again, we have angle 1, and then the second angle would be this one right here, angle 2. When you see that box, you know that when you put angle 1 together with angle 2, it makes that box, which is a 90-degree angle. So angle 1 and angle 2 would be complementary. Another way you could see it is they don't necessarily have to be adjacent. They could just give you an angle that looks like this and say that this is 40 degrees, and then they could do something like this, okay, and say 50 degrees. And then you look and say, okay, well, 40 plus 50 is 90, so those 2 angles would also be complementary. So they can give it to you both ways. They can give it to you as adjacent angles that make that corner, or they can give them to you as 2 separate angles that happen to add up to 90 degrees. Next, we're going to look at supplementary angles. Supplementary angles are any 2 angles whose sum is 180. Okay, so this time, instead of 90 degrees, it's 180 degrees. And again, 2 types of pictures that you can run across with this. So the first one, you can have adjacent angles again, meaning you're going to have two angles that are next to each other. Let's draw that. So here's angle 1. Here's angle 2. Okay, they're adjacent, they're next to each other, share a side. But what I notice is together they form this straight angle. Okay. And we know that straight angles from last week measure 180 degrees. Okay. And some people like to say they're next to each other and make a straight line. That works too. But together they make that straight line, which is 180. So they would be supplementary. We could say angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2. Now, just like your complementary angles, you could also have them drawn as two separate angles. They don't have to be adjacent. So again, we could say this angle is 50, and then we have another angle hanging out over here. Let's say it's 130. So I could say, oh, 130 plus 50, there's the 180 degrees, so those would also be supplementary. So again, they can draw them one of two ways, but any two angles whose sum is 180, you would call them supplementary. The last pair are linear, and this is one we're not going to use a whole lot, but do want to show it to you. If you have two angles that are adjacent, so they have to be next to each other, and supplementary, okay, so they're next to each other and they add up to 180, we know that this is a straight line. When that happens, we can also call them a linear pair, a pair of angles that make a line, linear pair. Now, because they have to be adjacent, it's only going to look like this. They have to be next to each other and they have to share a side. Okay, they can't be two separate pictures. So here's 1, here's angle 2. Okay, very clearly they're next to each other. Okay, they share this side right here. So they're adjacent. And then I notice also they're next to each other. They make this straight line, the straight angle right here, running along here. And so that makes them supplementary. And so we could say they're linear. They're a linear pair. The three pairs that we will be focusing on the most are vertical, complementary, and supplementary. And so you want to make sure you know that vertical angles are across from each other and they're congruent. You want to make sure you know complementary add up to 90 and supplementary add up to 180. So let's see that in action with a couple practice problems. So this is what we're going to be working on. Maybe. Oh, technical difficulties. Come on. All right, hold on 1 second. Apologize. This is why Cabinet is not always your friend, because it doesn't want to work. So let's see if I can get it to pop up. There we go. All right. So here's what we're actually going to work on, if it will pull up. There we go. Good. So step 1, determine the type of angles shown. Write an equation, solve. Okay, so right now, all you guys are going to do is you're going to look at the two angles that they're giving you, okay, and we're going to do the first three together and decide, are they complementary, supplementary, or vertical? So if we look at number 1, okay, I have two angles. One's red, one's green. I just marked them so you could see them better. So they are across from each other. So which angles are across from each other? Vertical angles. And what do we know about vertical angles? Vertical angles are congruent. So right now, that's all we want you to do. What kind of angles? Vertical. Okay, they're across from each other. What do I know about them? Remember, that's my symbol for congruent. It's kind of hard to read. because next Tuesday, on Tuesday when we come back to school, we will be solving these. All right, let's look at the second question. Okay, number 2 right here. Okay, so again, what you look at the green angle, look at the red angle. They're next to each other. Okay. Do they make a corner or do they make a straight line? They make a straight line put together, or a straight angle. So we know that they are supplementary, okay, and you can abbreviate. And what do we know about supplementary angles? They add up to 180 degrees. The reason this is important to jot both of these pieces of information down is when we actually go to set up the equation, this is going to help you do that. All right, last one I'm going to look at with you is these two right here. So again, look at the green, look at the red. Let me erase this so you're not confused by what you see here. All right. So again, clearly they're next to each other. So once you decide that, you know they're not vertical. And so you just have to ask yourself, together, do they make a straight line or do they make a corner? And if you look, together, they make this corner. Okay, and we see the box. So that box tells us that those two angles together equal 90. So which pair is that? That would be complementary. And again, you can abbreviate as long as you can tell us that's complementary. Don't tell us it's comp and you don't know what it means. Complementary, or you can abbreviate. So they're complementary. And what do we know about complementary angles? They add up to 90. Okay, so what you're going to do on the back is the same thing. You're just going to tell us the types of angles and what do you know about them. When we come back together, we will actually set up the equations.